Hello everybody and welcome to an ESO guide video with me, Sherman. Today we're going to be talking about classes, but the main class we're going to be talking about today is the Templar class. Now each class does have its own unique abilities and stuff that make it more beneficial to play based on certain things. Like the Templar gains more better healing and stuff like that, but they also grow in power based more on physical damage and spell damage than really anything else. They don't gain any bits from fire, frost, and stuff like that. The Dragon Knight is a now the Templar does make a really good tank. Sorry, before I get the Dragon Knight, the Templar does make a really good tank. It makes a really good healer, and usually one of the two is really good for them. But they do make great Magicka and Stamina DPS. Next is the Dragon Knight. The Dragon Knight is a really good tank, along with being a really good DPS, Flame DPS, and Poison DPS. So they can go either Magicka DPS or Stamina DPS and be really good at it. They also make really good Magicka-based characters. Now, they're not great healers, but they do get some good healing effect. So that's or healing efficiency. But they do get some other things to them that makes them really unique. The Sorcerer is a really powerful person with shock damage and physical damage. They make really good Magicka and Stamina DPS, but at the same time, they make decent tanks and decent healers. They are not the best. Nightblades, on the other hand, are really good at stealth damage and stuff like that. They can go Stamina or Magicka DPS, and they're really good at it. But they make really good healers and Stamina DPS more than anything. So you get those two choices there. They make okay tanks, but the Sorcerer and Nightblade are missing magic resistance. Now we're going to get into the Templar and start talking about that right now. So first off, you have 3 skill lines for each class. The first one is Aedric Spear for the Templar. Next is Dawn Wraith, and then Restoring Light. We're going to start with Aedric Spear with their ultimate. Their ultimate is Radial Sweep. Now you do have to unlock this at a certain rank level of your class, which is rank 12, and then most of the other ones are at like rank 1 and stuff. So Radial Sweep. Swing your Aedric Spear around you with Holy Vengeance, dealing X magic damage to all nearby enemies, and an additional Y magic damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Now this is a really powerful attack. It can do a lot of damage if you're a Magicka-based character. Now you guys remember what I said in the beginning? They get a lot from straight, like pure Magicka, or pure spell damage, or pure weapon damage. They grow more powerful with that than any of the other classes. And that's because that's their only benefit. They don't get any extra frost damage, they don't get any extra fire damage and stuff, but they are one of the most efficient healers, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So Empowering Sweep is one of the first morphs. It does have 2 morphs, so it has Empowering Sweep and Crescent Sweep. Starting with the first morph, what it does is it takes reduced damage for each enemy hit. So what it allows you to do is it does the magic damage up front, and then it also reduces the damage dealt to you by 15% for 8 seconds, plus an additional 4% for each enemy hit. It's a really powerful tanking ability. The next one, though, deals additional damage up front to enemies in front of you, and the enemies in front of you will take an extra 66% damage in the initial hit, but you don't get that damage reduction, so this is a lot better for DPS, or a Magicka DPS. Next one is a really badly... it's an abused ability, I'll say that. But it's called Puncturing Strikes, and basically what it does is your character will get this lance type thing, and they do like a multiple striking attack with it. It's a Spear of Light thing. But it launches a relentless assault, striking enemies in front of you 4 times with your Aedric Spear, dealing magic damage with each strike. The closest enemy takes 140% additional damage each strike, and their movement speed is reduced by 70% for 2 seconds on the final hit. Really good tanky type ability, but one of the problems is people tend to spam this way too much, and I can tell you, I watched a person in a dungeon waste all their resources on this one ability, and it was just funnier than heck, because I was like, why aren't you using any other abilities? And they're like, oh, because I don't need to. I'm like, it's kind of pointless to have just one ability that you're using out of a whole class. Next is Biting Jabs. Now, Biting Jabs is the first morph, and then has the second morph, Puncturing Sweeps. Now, Biting Jabs converts to a stamina ability and increases your weapon critical rating. So when you use this, you get 8 seconds of increased weapon critical. Now, the benefit to this is that you also get increased critical damage when you have an Aedric Spear ability on your bar. We'll get to that in a minute as well. But it just adds more damage to your character. allowing your character to consistently do more criticals. Puncturing sweeps, launch a relentless assault again, but what this one does is it also heals you for a percentage of the damage done. So it heals you for 35% of the damage done with that attack. It's a very powerful thing to have if you're playing like a Magicka DPS. It's a way to get some health back and stuff like that. But trust me guys, these are not the only two abilities that the Templar have. They have a lot more powerful abilities, and they have some really helpful abilities. We'll get to those in a minute. Piercing Javelin is the next ability, and it hurl your spear at an enemy with a godlike strength, dealing X magic damage. It's basically like Zeus and his lightning bolt. You know, you throw it, and it hits them, and it stuns them for 1.8 seconds and knocks them back 5 meters. So this is a very powerful thing to use if you want to keep enemies at bay and keep them away from like your healer, whatever. You can do this and throw it at them and knock them back. There is 2 morphs. One is Aurora Javelin, the other one is Blinding Javelin. Now, Aurora Javelin is a very powerful magic ability. I'm not kidding you. It does get some pretty powerful stuff to it. But what this one does is it deals additional damage based on the distance the spear travels. So my suggestion, if you're playing a character using this ability, it's better to be at a distance when you're casting spells anyways, so it's very good for a Magicka-based character, and you can also use it to keep enemies off of you. It does cost a lot of Magicka, so if you're not in light armor, yeah, it's going to be even more costly. Now, Binding Javelin is the stamina morph for this, and what it does is it stuns enemy for a longer duration. This is actually a lot better for a tank to use, but I used it on when I was running bow on my Templar for a while. I'd use it on the bow bar so I could get that extra knockback instead of using the bow ability with the knockback. So I'd use this instead. Next up is Focus Charge. Charge with a Divine Lance to impel your enemy, dealing X magic damage. If the enemy hit is casting, they're interrupted. Now that's a really good thing, because there's a lot of times you're going to find casting enemies in dungeons and stuff, and this just gives you a way to interrupt them so that they're not sitting there casting constantly. Explosive Charge deals damage and interrupts all enemies near the impact point. So this is like, literally, when you hit, it does like this boom sound, and it interrupts and stuns all the enemies for 3 seconds. Very good ability. I would not suggest using this as a stamina tank, but as a Magicka tank, it is very, very powerful. You can also use this as a Magicka player if you want to get in close and hit somebody and stun them and then like roll away or something. It's pretty good. Now, Toppling Charge is another good one. Always stuns the enemy regardless if they are casting. Also sets them off balance if they are casting. Now, if you guys don't know what this off balance thing is, go watch my Champion Point. I think it's my Champion Point video, and it explains why this ability is pretty good to have on your bar. Now, this one you can use both Magicka and stamina base, but if you're playing a Templar, it's really good to go with like a mix if you're going to play one more, you know, hybrid-y type thing, because the way the class works, it's got a lot of Magicka-based stuff and a few stamina-based things, but you can offset that depending on how you're playing them. Now, if you're playing a Magicka like a tank, you can have both stamina and Magicka, and pretty hybrid them those stats pretty well, depending on how you're set up or what race you're playing. So very good. Both of these abilities are very good to stun enemies and stuff like that. But I wouldn't suggest doing it unless I was playing a Magicka tank, to be honest. Because spears don't get a gap closer. This is a really good gap closer for a spear staff wielder. Sorry, staffs don't get a gap closer. Next one is Spear Shards. Now, Spear Shards send a spear into the heavens to bring down a shower of Divine Wraith, dealing X magic damage to the enemies in the target area. Also disorientates them for 6 seconds. When you activate, and while active, an ally can pick up the spear. This is a synergy. If you guys don't know what synergy is, it basically allows you to use or play off other people's abilities. This is a really good one to use, especially if you're a healer. You can throw this into your you know, in at a boss or something, and if your stamina group person's running a little low on stamina, this is a good way for them to get stamina back. It's also good for stamina, for them to do that for stamina tanks, because stamina tanks have a tendency to run out of stamina sometimes on certain bosses, because they're either overusing their damage shields, or they're overusing, or their absorption shields, or they're overusing their block. So this is a good way to keep that stamina coming into them. Next is Luminous Shards, which is their first morph, and it restores stamina and Magicka over time. So not only do they get that 25% stamina, they also get extra stamina and Magicka, which is a really good benefit for a certain kinds of tanks, like those hybrid tanks I was telling you about. And it's also good if you have magic or DPS out there, you know, in front doing the pulse or whatever, they can grab the spear and get some extra magicka back over time. This next one is a really good one, because what it does is it hits the ground and ignites it on impact and stuns the enemy. So it adds an extra damage over time effect to the ability, making it more effective than one that just, you know, hits and stuns and then that's it. This one does that. Now this one stuns instead of disorientates. Now this one disorientates, this one stuns. So you got those two choices. Now next is a really good one if you're playing a tank. Now the reason I say it's a really good one for playing a tank, Sun Shield, surround yourself on solar rays, granting a damage shield equal to 30% of your max health for 6 seconds. Now that 30% can increase based on your max health. Nearby enemies take additional damage, magic damage when the shield is activated, and each enemy hit increases the shield's strength by 4%. So you can get this shield pretty big, trust me. I've gotten mine up to like 50 or like 70-80% of my max health, and it's a very powerful shield. Now it does have 2 morphs. The first one has a reduced cost, and the shield the shield is strengthened further for each enemy hit. Now I will say this, it is completely up to the tank playing which one they want to go with. I would suggest the Radiant Ward if you're a magicka tank, because with that reduced cost, you're not going to be using as much magicka to keep it off. Now the shield does only last for 6 seconds, but the fact that it does it based on max health makes it even more effective for you, because then you get this greater shield based on your maxed health. Blazing Shield, on the other hand, is similar to this, but it does damage after instead of at the beginning. So no longer deals damage to enemies on activation, instead deals damage when the shield expires based on the amount of damage it absorbs. Now this is the damage shield I personally use on my tank, and that's because the more I play a stamina tank, so I'm up front and close and personal with the enemy, and I can adjust my magicka to where I can keep it in rotation almost consistently. Now, what happens is when the shield expires, it does 50% of the damage that's absorbed back to the enemy. So if you got to think, if you have a 30-40k health and you're fighting an enemy, this shield also grows based on Bastion. So if it's like 30% here and you have 8% in Bastion, it'll be 38% of your max health. So you can grow this up pretty big, but don't try to grow it too big. 40-45% is really good to have it at. Maybe 50% if you can get it there. If you can get up to 50% damage shield, it is a very powerful damage shield, and it will give you a shield based on 50% of your max health. Now you got to think, if you have a 30,000 health, 50% of it is 15,000, and then you do 50% of that 15,000 back to your enemies. That's an 8,000 damage shield, or damage you're doing back to your enemies, all the enemies around you on a consistent basis. And if you're fighting like a group of trash, this will blast consistently, doing a lot of damage to your enemies. So it's a very powerful thing to have as a stamina tank. Next is the passives. First, starting off with Piercing Spear. Now I'm not going to go over rank 1 stuff, I'm just going to talk about the rank 2 stuff, because I want you to see the total benefit, the full effect that you can get. Now remember I told you guys, while you have an Aedric Spear ability slotted, you get that 10% extra critical strike. This is where you get it, but it also and your damage against blocking targets is increased by 10%. So you get 10% critical strike damage, and you get 10% blocking damage against blocking targets. So you get both those types of damage types, and it's very powerful when you actually get the full effect of all your abilities with that. So next is Spear Wall. Spear Wall is a really cool ability, but you have to have an Aedric Spear ability slotted, and it increases the amount of damage you can block against melee attacks by 10%. So even if you're using a two-handed, you can block melee attacks really well. Your damage shields will block most of the magicka, and if you can't, if they knock down your shields, you still can block melee attacks. Now you're going to be blocking quite a few melee attacks, so it's good to put block reduction in your character's champion points. I wouldn't suggest doing it on their gear, because you're going to want those greater resistances. Next up is Burning Light. Now this is one of the really more powerful abilities for the Templar, and what it does is, while using an Aedric Spear ability, it gives you a 25% chance to cause extra magic damage at any time you hit an enemy with an Aedric Spear ability, and it goes based off of your physical damage, so your stamina and weapon damage, or your max magicka and spell damage. So you get those, whatever one's higher is what you're going to do the most damage with. Since mine's stamina, I get like a 3 to 4k extra damage that I do back to the enemy, or can do to the enemy. Now remember, I run Blazing Shield and Biting Jab, so I get both of those that can fire off this extra damage, and it does help because you can stack a lot of damage that way. Last one is Balanced Warrior, and this one increases your weapon damage by 6% and your spell resistance by 2,640. Now the great thing about this is if you're using a weapon that gives you Major Brutality, you not only get 20% extra damage, weapon damage, you get 6% also. So what it does is it takes it, you get 6% naturally, and then what it'll do is when you add that 20%, it recalculates your total weapon damage by 26% instead of 20%. So it does increase your weapon damage even more. So it's a really powerful thing to have if you're playing a stamina-based character. Make sure you're using something that gives you extra weapon damage. Now, the thing I do is I use a two-handed, and the reason why is because I get that extra weapon damage. Now, if you're running sword and board, you will not get Empower. If you're running two-handed or dual wield, you will get sorry, not Empower. You'll get Major Brutality from either one of those. Now, if you're using a staff, you're not going to get Major Sorcery either. So the only way you can get it is from the Mage's Guild. So just remember that if you're playing a Templar, they do not get Major Brutality or Major Sorcery. You have to get them from another source. Now, if it's to dual wield, you have to get it from their the final ability in dual wield, which is now going to be like the 4th ability, but it's like Hidden Blade, and basically you throw a knife out and hit your enemies, but it will give you Major Brutality for 20 seconds. It's a very powerful thing to have on any character, because anytime you can increase your weapon damage, it can have other effects too, and I get into that into other videos later on. Dawn's Wraith. Now this is like a holy light damage line, but it's got some really powerful things. Starting with Nova, of course. Call down a fragment of the sun to the target area, dealing X magic damage each second to enemies and reducing their damage done by 30%. This is a really effective thing to have on a healer, because you can drop this for your group for support. It not only does damage up front, but allies can activate a thing that does damage to all enemies in the area and stunning them for 2.5 seconds. That's the synergy with it. A lot of skills do have synergies, especially the Undaunted abilities. If you guys watch all the videos that I'm going to be making, you will see all these different, I'll explain all these different synergies. Now the great thing about this is that 30% damage reduces the damage that the enemy does by 30%. That means their damage that when they hit you is reduced by 30%. Then if you have a greater damage reduction, it's reduced by that %. So you get hit, you block whatever damage with your resistances, your damage reduction kicks in and reduces that damage. But this will reduce their initial damage that they do before you block it. So it's a greater effect, and it's really good for a healer to use. Now as a tank, I would use this, but I need extra resistance stuff, so that it's not really such a good idea for me to use it. Now I do run it from time to time, depending on the dungeon situation, or the trial or whatever. It depends on the situation what's going to be more effective. Next is Solar Prison. This is the first morph. Allies may activate a more powerful synergy ability, and then we have Solar Disturbance. Also reduces movement speed of enemies in target area. What this does is it makes this Gravity Crush a lot stronger. This thing becomes super powerful. It can hit for a lot more damage, and it stuns for a longer time. So the stun lasts 5 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds. Now what this one does is it also reduces their movement speed. That's why this is better for a support character to run, because it reduces the enemy's movement speed when they're in range of this thing, and it's by 62%. But I think that number is off. I think it's just 60%. Next is Sunfire. Now Sunfire is a very powerful ability when you learn to use it properly. But it basically blasts an enemy with a charge of radiant heat, dealing X flame damage. Now this is the only ability they have, well, one of the only abilities they have that does flame damage. So your champion point says flame and magic damage, so if it is a magic ability, but it scales both. So it will do both flame and magic damage from the champion point's elemental expert. Remember that, because if you have a lot in elemental expert, you get that both that flame damage and that other thing. Also put in a thaumaturgy for this one, because it does do fire damage over time, so you can increase that damage. Upon activation, you gain Major Prophecy, which increases your spell critical by 10%. This is another way you can increase your spell damage by increasing your spell critical. And so very powerful ability, very, very good to have on your bar. The next one, though, is Vampire's Bane. Now, this one does a damage over time. The damage over time lasts longer. And as you can see, it's over 9 seconds instead of 5. So you're doing a lot more damage over that 9 seconds. Very good one to use if you're playing a Magicka DPS. Now, if you're also playing a Magicka DPS, you can also do this one, which is Reflective Light. Splits the projectile, allowing it to affect 2 additional nearby enemies. So it'll hit 3 targets in total. It doesn't do as much damage over time, but it does do a lot of damage up front, and it gives them the reduced movement speed. So it's a good way to CC. Not as maybe as a Magicka tank, this would be better than this. Vampire's Bane. This would be better for DPS, this would be better for a tank, because that's your job. Your job is to control a fight, so you reducing movement speed is really, really important. Next up is Solar Flare. Now, Solar Flare is a really, really, really good ability. A lot of people don't use it, but there is 2 morphs to it that make it a really good ability. The reason a lot of people don't use it is because it's a channeled ability. That means it takes time to cast. So conjure a ball of solar energy to heave at an enemy, dealing X magic damage. Also grants you Empower, increasing the damage of your next attack. Now, Empower is a very special thing that you're going to want to use a lot of. Anytime that you can get extra damage on an enemy, the more damage you do. Now, the reason I say this is a good one is because it does give you Empower. Now, it does have 2 morphs. Now, the first morph is a really good one to use, especially on certain dungeon encounters. Applies Major Defile to the target and nearby enemies, reducing their healing received. Now, it is a short timer, but I believe you can increase it. Yes, you can increase this timer to last a longer time through your champion point, or I think it's through your stuff below, through your passives, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this one basically applies Major Defile. If you don't know what Major Defile is, it basically reduces the healing that the enemy gets, and in certain boss encounters, this is a very special thing to use. Like Bandit Shells 1 at the end, the boss there gets some healing from these orbs if you don't destroy the orbs in time, and they can heal him for about 300,000 to 500,000 health, and you don't want him to get that 300,000 to 500,000 extra health back, trust me. So if you kill him, if you destroy those orbs, he won't get the healing. But having this allows you to also apply that to him, so when those orbs are getting close to him, you hit him with this, so he doesn't get the heal. It's not as effective. It won't heal him for that much. It'll only be like 1.5, 1.600 or 160,000 health instead of the 300,000. It's really good to use. Now, Solar Barrage is another one that's really good to use because it no longer has a cast time, but deals less damage and hits enemies around you instead. So it hits multiple targets, and it's a really, really decent ability. A lot of people don't, like I said, just don't like to use these things. Backlash is the next ability, and it's a really good ability to use as well, because what it does is any damage that's done to the enemy while this is active, 18% or more will be added on top of it. So you cast this on him, and it'll start stacking. It doesn't stack damage. Any damage done to it, it absorbs so much of that damage as well, and then gives it to him all at once. One giant hit at the end. Very powerful ability, and it's really good to use, and it doesn't cost much. And here's the great thing about it, is it lasts 6 seconds. Now, there's a reason why this is a great thing to use, because of that 6-second effect, and we'll get to that in the passives. First morph is Purifying Light. When the effect ends, a pool of sunlight remains attached to the enemy and healing nearby enemies. This is great for a healer to use. It's a very good support ability, but it also adds more damage to the group's total damage on a boss or an encounter, and you're going to want to use this because you're going to want to maintain your ultimates, and this will help you do that, and I'll get to that in a minute. The next one converts to a stamina ability and deals physical damage, also applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach to the enemy, reducing their physical and spell resistance. So if you're looking for a way to get that 10,000 off the, just 10,000 extra damage reduction on your enemy, reducing their resistances, this is a way to do that. You can put this on the enemy. It lasts for 6 seconds, and like I said, it's going to help you build ultimate. And so if you're a tank or a DPS, these two abilities are really important to use. And there's a reason why it's really important to use these, is because not only does it apply that minor fracture and minor breach, but it does that thing where it stacks damage. And this one's based on physical, this one's based on magic. So they do grow in damage based on max stamina, this percentage does, and this one grows on max magicka. So that's why you kind of want these on your bar, because they do become more powerful. Mine does 19% more damage. If you have over 30,000, it does 20% more damage. If you have over 30,000 magic, you get the same thing. So it does get more and more damage. Really good things, and we'll get to the thing with the ultimate chain in a second. Eclipse. Now this is a kind of a weird one, because you envelop the enemy in a lightless sphere that reflects back any harmful projectiles cast. So it's really good to put this on a caster's, but unless it's like, it's kind of like an odd thing. Like you can use it and it's really good. I mean, this thing is really good because you place a volatile magnetic energy on the target, which explodes after 5 seconds, dealing X magic good damage to them and nearby enemies. It's kind of like a trap, but any damage they try to cast on you goes right back to them, and they take it. And then when it ends, it explodes, dealing damage to nearby enemies. It's a very powerful thing, but a lot of people just don't like to use it. Now it does have 2 morphs, Total Dark, and then Unstable Core. Now Total Dark, you are healed for each spell reflected. So you cast it on yourself, or you cast it on the enemy, and then you're healed for the amount of damage it does, or that they do. It still gets the exploding thing and everything else. Now the next morph no longer reflects spells back to the enemy. Instead, the explosion deals significantly increased damage and can be placed on an unlimited amount of targets. So you can cast it on multiple enemies, allowing them all to explode, doing more damage to the area. So if you're fighting a boss that summons a lot of adds, you can put it on the adds and then on the boss, and then when they die or when they wears off, it explodes, hitting all of them with that amount of damage. It's a really powerful thing. It's really good for AoE type stuff. But I would still suggest, if you're playing any class, to always have one ability of each class on your bar, because you get benefits from all 3 trees most of the time for having one ability slotted. Next up is Radiant Destruction. Now a lot of people like this. This is what everyone calls the Beam of Death. Burn an enemy with a ray of holy fire, dealing X magic damage over 2.8 seconds. Targets below 50% health take 330% additional damage. This is an execute, guys. This means that any time that you can do more damage to an enemy below a certain amount of health is going to kill them faster. So that's why they call it an execute. It's a very powerful ability because of it. You're not going to use it at the beginning of a fight. You're going to wait until they get down in health. Then you're going to use this ability to increase the amount of damage you do. So remember, you have an ability up here that gives you Empower. So when you get that enemy low in health, you're going to hit them with this Solar Flare. I would prefer, I'd use Solar Barrage personally, because then you can hit multiple targets with it, and you get that Empower, and then hit the main target with this. If you're fighting a boss, hit him with that Solar Barrage, then hit him with Radiant Glory, or Radiant Destruction. Very powerful. Now you got 2 morphs. This Radiant Glory heals you based on the percentage of damage inflicted, so you get 20% health, 20% of the damage inflicted back to you in healing. So you get a lot of extra healing from this when the enemy is low on health. So it does help you sustain yourself while you're fighting the enemy in that last 50%. Radiant Oppression deals additional damage in proportion to your current magicka. Now this is really good for a really heavy magicka DPS, because it grows by 20%. So now not only are you doing 20% more damage from that Empower, you're doing 40% more damage. Very, very powerful ability. Next up is the first passive, and it is Enduring Rays, and it increases the duration of your Sun, Fire, Eclipse, and Nova abilities by 30%. So you remember how I told you this right up here? You can increase the durations of these things by a greater thing, like this Sun 7.2. You can increase it, and it's going to take it up. I don't remember what the total is, but mine is like 9-10 seconds, so it's pretty powerful. And that 10 seconds, trust me, it does help, because you can fire it off when you know they're going to be healing soon. Next is Prism. Now this is where I told you guys you can get that ultimate. So being a tank, I use this a lot. I use the Power of the Light a lot, not just for the minor breach and minor fracture, but or minor breach, minor fracture. I also use it because of the fact that it gives me 3 ultimate. So every 6 seconds that you cast one of those abilities, you will get 3 ultimate. And that's why I use those abilities, because it's every 6 seconds they go off. So it's a reminder of, hey, I need to cast again so I can get more ultimate. Next is Illuminate. Now, Illuminate's a pretty powerful thing, because anytime you activate a Dawn's Wraith ability, you give minor sorcery to your group, increasing their spell damage by 5% for 20 seconds. Now, if you have, like I said, you know that ability, Major Sorcery or Major Brutality, you get the 6% weapon damage, you get that 5% extra spell damage. So you want those two abilities on your bar regardless. You want Major Sorcery from the Mage's Guild, and you want Major Brutality from a weapon in order to make it really work for you. And it does increase your damage potential by 25% with, or 26% with weapons, and 25% with spells. And with the increased spell damage, even as a healer, it's going to give you greater healing potential because of it. So it's the more spell damage you get, the more powerful your heals are going to be. So just to let you know. Now the next one is Restoring Spirit. This is one of my favorite ones because it reduces Magicka, Stamina, and Ultimate cost by 4%, which allows you, or makes it to where you don't need as many points in your champion points to make this effective. So it's really to make them effective in there, so you can reduce the cost of things at a cheaper price, or cheaper, and you don't have to use as many champion points to reach the effect you're looking for. Next up is Restoring Light. Now this is your healing tree, and it is a very, very powerful healing tree. In fact, this is why Templars are the most powerful healers in the game. Starting with their ultimate rite of passage, channel the grace of the gods, healing you and nearby allies for X health every 1 second. You cannot move while channeling, but you gain immunity to all enemy control effects. So you can still take damage, but you become immune to all that stuff. Now with a passive, you can increase your resistances by 16,500 when you're channeling this ability, so you don't take as much damage, and your heals will basically mitigate any damage you take. Now it is a 4-second channel, so that means when you start casting, it will last for 4 seconds, and you heal for 1 second for that 4-second channel. And depending on your max Magicka, it's a lot of health. Now you get Remembrance as one of the morphs, and Practice Incarnation as the other. Now Remembrance, you and your allies take less damage while being healed, so you give everyone 20% damage reduction while you're channeling this heal. The best time to use this is when a boss does some like ground effect damage or something like that, or they're getting ready to do some really heavy damage. You can start channeling this, so not only you don't take as much damage, but your group. Now remember, you're going to get 16,500 extra armor or resistances plus this 20% damage reduction. So even if you have, say, 15k resistances, this is going to give you another 20%, and you're going to get that extra 1,600 added to that 1,500, which is going to put you at almost 30,000 physical and spell resistance, making you almost like a tank for a few seconds. So it's a really powerful thing. Now if you're playing a heal tank, this is an ability you're going to want to use. This one up here. The next one is increases the duration of the channel, and that means it goes from 4 seconds to 6 seconds. A very powerful heal and increased duration. This is really good for heal tanks, or if you want that extra support on your bar to give your group some extra support, this is a very powerful ability. This is also a very powerful heal. Next up is Ruined or Rushed Ceremony. Now this is a really good heal. Beacon of Inner Light, healing yourself and a wounded ally. You heal yourself and one other person. Now it does have 2 morphs. It has Honor the Dead and Breach of Life. Now Honor the Dead refunds part of your ability's cost when used to heal an injured target. The other one is Breath of Life, and Breath of Life also heals one other injured target for half the amount. Now this is a really good one because if you use it, it refunds part of the ability's cost when used to heal an injured target. This is a really good one to use when you're playing a heal tank, because it restores 60% of the ability's cost over 8 seconds as Magicka. So when you cast it, you get 60% of the cost back to you at over 8 seconds. Really good for a tank or a healer, or even as a support person. Somebody who wants to just carry an extra ability on their bar to help out the grid if you're a Magicka-based player. Really good one to have. Next is Breath of Life, of course, and it also heals one other injured target for half the amount. So you're going to heal one person or two people, and then you're going to heal a third one for half the amount. 90% of the times, it's going to be you're going to heal yourself and one of the DPS that's taken some decent damage, and that other heal is going to go, that half heal is going to go to a tank. Now, if a tank is set up right, they're going to get healing received, and it's going to heal them for more. Next is Healing Ritual. Very powerful heal. It is a channeled heal. Focus your spirits of devotion, spiritual devotion, healing yourself and nearby allies for X amount. You receive 30% additional healing from your own healing ritual. Now, this one is getting changed in the Homestead update. It will be losing this 30% because it is a very powerful heal as it is. Now, this was great for tanking. If you were playing a heal tank, because you could get that extra 30% healing on yourself, and this is a channeled heal. So that means when you start casting it, it heals you yourself and nearby allies for a certain amount when the channel effect ends. So now the two more is Ritual of Rebirth and Lingering Ritual. Now, Ritual of Rebirth has the ability has faster cast time. The other one grants additional healing after a short delay. So you get, this one gives you a quicker cast time. This one here gives you another heal afterwards. Now, if you're playing a Templar, this next ability you will want on both bars at all times. Doesn't matter if you're playing tank, healer, or DPS. And it doesn't matter magic or stamina. This is something you're going to want to keep on your bar, and that's Restoring Aura. And the reason you're going to want to keep it on your bar is because while it's slotted in your bar, you gain minor fortitude, minor endurance, and minor intellect. That means your health, stamina, and magic recovery are increased by 10%. And this is the only way you can get that extra 10% as this class. Some classes have it naturally built in somewhere in one of their passives, but they do not. They have to have this on their bar to give it to them. So you want to have this on your bar. Now, it does have two morphs, Radiant Aura and Repentance. Now, either one is really good, but one benefits one more than the other. One has increased radius and also grants major intellect on activation, increasing your magic recovery. Now, this one does have an activated ability where it gives major fortitude and major endurance, increasing yours and your group's total recovery by 20%. So you get health and stamina recovery by 20%, but you get 30% of those instead. Now, like I said, it has two morphs. This first one grants extra magic recovery, so you get 20% health, stamina, and magic recovery that you give to your whole group for 15 seconds. That means any heavy attacks that if somebody needs to get resources back, this is a good way to do it, especially for yourself. If you're a magicka person or a healer and you want to get more magicka back, you cast this and channel your heavy attack to get that magicka back, and it's going to give you greater magicka return. So it's a very powerful ability. Next is Repentance. This is something I would say any stamina or player or tank run, and that's because it no longer applies major recovery buffs on activation. Instead, it consumes the essence of corpses and restores health and stamina. So if you're a stamina tank, really great to have, and if you're a stamina DPS, it's really great to have because it's a way to maintain your health and stamina in trash fights and stuff. Because anytime you kill an enemy, you can just pop it real quick and it's going to give you an extra chunk of stamina and health back. When you're fighting boss encounters, if you can fire it at the right time, you can constantly be giving health and stamina to you and your DPS characters up front, those stamina DPS characters, and it's a really powerful ability because of that. Next up is Cleansing Ritual. Now, this is a really cool one because it's an area of effect heal. So what it does is you place down this big circle around you, and it cleanses 2 harmful effects from yourself immediately, and healing you and nearby allies for X amount every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. So it's a very big area of effect heal. Great to use if you are a healer and also as a DPS, and I'll explain why it's good to use as a DPS. Now, it has 2 morphs. The first one is Ritual of Retribution, and the other one is Extended Ritual. Now, if you're playing a healer / you want some extra damage, this first one is a really good one to use because it increases the healing and it also damages enemies who stand in the area of effect. So this one is really good to use if you're a DPS or a healer, because then you can plant this down, you can give everyone a heal, and you're going to give everyone, the enemies extra damage. Really good one to use. Now, if you're playing you want to get the effects to last longer, you could go with the extended ritual, which means that circle that you put down is going to last 18 seconds instead of 12. It increases the duration and the amount of harmful effects cleansed from yourself. So instead of removing 5 harmful effects, or 2 harmful effects, you remove 5. But it's a very longer lasting heal. Either one is good to go with. It's up to you. Now, Ruin of Focus is something that if you're playing, no matter what you're playing as a Templar, this is something you're going to want to have on your bar no matter what. You're going to want it on one bar, and you're going to want to cast it as often as possible because of what it does. Create a Rune of Celestial Protection, which defends you while you stand within it, and for up to 8 seconds after leaving it. So you will get Major Resolve, Major Ward, which increases your physical and spell resistance by 5,280 for 12 seconds. Now remember, if you're wearing light armor, you're going to have a very low physical resistance, so this is a good way to boost it up and give you 5,000 extra. So if you're wearing light armor, most likely you're going to have about a 10k physical resistance, maybe 12 if you're lucky, and it's going to give you 5,000 extra on top of that, so it's going to put you around that 16,000 mark, which is going to be perfect. Now, if you're running a Resto Staff as a healer, you're going to get an extra 1,350 on top of that, because one of the spells in there is going to give you extra, it's going to give you Minor Resolve and Minor Ward, so you're going to be able to do that as well. So it's going to consistently give you these extra things, increasing your resistances, making it so when you get hit, you block more damage, and your reduction reduces it even more. So the more damage you can mitigate, the better off you are as anything. Next up is Channeled Focus. Now this is the first morph, and it also reduces the cost, and the Ruin also recovers Magicka. This is great for Magicka DPS and healers to use. The reason why, you get that Major Resolve, Major Ward, and it increases your, it does that, but it also restores, or you also recover 120 Magicka over 0.5 seconds. Now this amount does grow. It gets bigger. So every 1.5 seconds you get that back. Now I don't know if this is going to get the Magicka leech in the next update, but it might, and if that's the case, you're going to get 400 Magicka back every 0.5 seconds for the duration of 12 seconds. Next up is Restoring Focus, and these do grow, by the way, based on max Magicka or max stamina. The amount of time does grow, I think, or you get a passive that does that. Next up is Restoring Focus. This is the one you should use if you're a tank or DPS. Now the reason I say tank or DPS is because of what it offers you. The Ruin also grants you Minor Vitality and Minor Protection, increasing your healing received and reducing your damage taken. So it gives you 8% damage reduction, and it gives you 8% healing received. The great thing about this is that it allows you to get that 8%, and then you can get 10% from your champion points, giving you 18% when you're in the circle. So that means it doesn't matter if you're playing DPS or a healer, or a DPS or tank, you're going to get that 8% extra damage reduction. Now remember, as a healer, you're standing off in the distance, so you're not going to be taking as much damage. So you do get this effect here, and it's a lot better for you. Unless you're playing if you're playing a dual-wield tank or a two-handed tank, or like a melee healer, it's better to go with this, Restoring Focus, than it is this one. And that's because you're going to have on your weapon damage, you're going to have magic absorption, which means anytime you do do damage to the enemy with your melee weapons, you're going to have a chance of hitting them with extra magic damage, and then you're going to absorb so much magic back to yourself, giving you greater magic recovery. But this one, either way, really good, both abilities. Next is the passive, starting with the first one. Mending increases the healing effects from your Restoring Light abilities up to 10% in proportion to the severity of the target's wounds. So any of these abilities up there that heal, you're going to be able to increase that heal by 10% when the person, it's most of the time it's when they're below 50% health that 10% kicks in. So if they're below 50% health, this 10% will kick in, giving you an increased healing effect on them. Very powerful heals, trust me. Now this is what makes the Templar one of the most powerful healers in the whole game, because anytime they're standing in either one of these morphs, or they're standing in this, or they're channeling their rite of passage, they get major mending for the whole time that they're standing in it, and the 4 seconds after leaving it, they get major mending, which increases their healing done by 25%. This is why they are the most powerful healer in the game. It's because the 25% there, They don't have to use blessed, like put as many points into blessed. They can put more points into magic damage and into critical damage, giving them greater heals. Now these guys can overheal like it's no tomorrow, and it's a good thing because you want that overheal. You want to constantly keep your people at max health. So this is a good way to do that. Next up, they get Lightweaver, which increases the duration of their restoring aura. So this sorry, this will last longer. This 15 seconds grows by 20%. So you get 20% more duration on that. Healing Ritual grants 2 ultimate to allies under 60% health. So if you are playing a healer in this, this is a really good one to run. Either one of these, because then it gives your people 2 ultimate whenever they're under 60% health. And that happens quite a bit, especially with DPS. And then here's that thing that I told you about, Channeling Rite of Passage grants 16,500 bonus to your armor. So that's 16,500 extra spell and physical resistance. Really powerful thing. Next up is Master Ritualist. Now this is another reason why they become the best healers in the game, is because they get increased resurrection speed by 20%. Resurrected allies return with 100% more health, and gives you 50% chance to gain a soul gem after each, or to fill a soul gem after each successful resurrection. So if you have an empty soul gem, you're going to have a 50% chance to fill it every time you res somebody. Really good way to maintain a soul gem, like, you know, keeping them in your rotation for rezzing, so you have a lot more of them. But this one right here is a really powerful one. All of these are really powerful, and it really helps to know that the Templar is one of the best healers, but they also make great tanks and great DPS. You just need to know how to set them up. But unfortunately, guys, that is the end of this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, you can hit that like button. It's right down over here on the right-hand side. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe to me. That's down over here on the left-hand side. And then just keep an eye out for my channel, because I will be posting a lot more videos. Trust me, I have a whole series of videos coming to the ESO guides, everything, the classes, to the weapon skills. I'm going to go through all the skill lines. I'm going to talk about like what gear sets and how they affect you. I'm going to talk about champion points, or I've already talked about champion points, but I'm going to be talking about a lot of different stuff in this guide series. So please keep an eye out for the rest of the videos to come. So other than that, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.